The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised. Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
The house at the end of the dirt road, where disembodied voices whisper and strange sounds make the living shiver.
Where shadows lurk at the edge of the woods, just outside your back door. And mysterious lights speed beyond reason across the clear night sky.
Odd events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole.
I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, everyone.
Before we get into tonight's stories, we would like to ask all of you fellow wanderers out there to please leave us a rating and a comment on whatever listening platform you listen to us on, Apple, Spotify, etc. We would really appreciate it, because there are so many podcasts out there, and your review and comments really help new people find us.
And we hate to ask, but advertising is really, really expensive, and we do our best to promote everywhere we can. So please, whenever you have some time, help us out.
Yeah, because Beth and I don't do the podcast to make a living like a lot of other people, but we do try to make enough money to help with all of our monthly fees and occasional equipment costs. But with that said, even if you're not able to purchase our premium episodes or donate on our website or even buy our merch, we truly understand.
Because each and every one of your reviews and comments makes a real difference, and we truly appreciate each and every one of you.
Yeah, now I know a lot of people say that, but we really do. I mean, without all of you listeners, we're just talking to dead air.
Just to each other, which we can do
all the time.
All the time.
But with that said, Beth's going to start us off tonight, as always.
I am.
And I get the feeling you have a really good story to share with everyone.
I do.
And why is that?
Because you kind of gave me the idea last week.
Yeah, see, once in a while I have some good ideas, don't I?
You do. You do. All right, so you know me pretty well and you know what I like, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so listen to this. Jumbo shrimp, Digby scallops, wild-caught halibut, little neck clams, and half a lobster tail, all together in a cream sauce with tomato risotto. Doesn't that sound like something I would like, or what?
Yeah, it sounds like something I'd like also, except for the scallops. I'm not a fan.
The cream sauce.
Yeah, I'm not big on cream sauce.
I know, that's something. It's something I would like.
Right.
Okay, how about this one? Lobster mac and cheese, but it's topped with miso foam and leek ash.
Yeah, that's right up your alley.
I don't even know what leek ash would taste like, but it's pretty fancy, right? So the menu of the Five Fishermen restaurant in Halifax, Nova Scotia sounds like both. It sounds delicious and fancy. But for those of you who don't like seafood, they also offer a rack of lamb, duck, and filet mignon. And if you're really fancy, you can try the chef's table menu, which is either a 7-course or a 9-course curated meal. The Five Fishermen restaurant prides itself on its food, impeccable service, and tasteful ambiance. In 2008, they won the Best in Halifax award for their mussels. In 2021, they received the Wine Spectator's Best of Award of Excellence. And in 2024, they earned the Open Table Diners Choice Award.
They're doing pretty well.
They are. And they also hold a spot on every single top 10 list of most haunted places in Halifax.
It's probably that fish ash.
No,
Or leak ash.
Leak ash.
Fish ash. Oh, what am I thinking about? I haven't been able to get that out of my head since you said it.
Leak ash?
Yes.
Yeah, not fish ash.
My apologies.
If you listened to our episode last week, then you know that the 5 fishermen also earned a spot in Wes's haunted bathroom story. And we don't usually cover the same place twice, at least we haven't yet. But when you mentioned this place last week and you told a little about its history, I had 2 thoughts. First, I knew that it had to be super haunted, way beyond just the bathroom. And second, if I was intrigued by the quick history that you gave of the place, I figured a lot of our wanderers probably were too.
Well, I'm glad you did this episode then, because it's definitely something that was truly intriguing.
Yes, you sent me down the rabbit hole. Thank you. And my hunch was correct because it is super, super haunted. There were just as many stories about the spooky stuff that people have experienced there as there were pages about its history, and you and I both know that rarely ever happens. So tonight, I'm going to take a much deeper dive into the haunted 5 Fishermen restaurant. The city of Halifax itself has an incredible history. Originally, the Micmac people spent their summers there on the shores of the Bedford Basin. Europeans arrived in the 1600s, both the French and the British. When they colonized the peninsula, the French called their capital city Port Royal, and the British called it Annapolis Royal. For the next 100 years or so, the French and the British fought for control of the peninsula. Now, I don't usually read anything verbatim from Wikipedia, but I love this section on Halifax so much that I just have to read it for everybody. Quote, sent by France in 1746 to attempt the recapture of Annapolis Royal, the Duc d'Anville expedition was catastrophic. It arrived in the Bedford Basin after a calamity-laden 3-month crossing of the Atlantic, having suffered disease, lightning strikes that blew up the ships, horrible storms, and attacks by the British Navy. After finally arriving in Nova Scotia and bringing his fleet into the Bedford Basin, the Duc d'Anville promptly died after suffering a stroke, throwing the expedition into even greater chaos. Eventually, the shambolic expedition moved on towards Annapolis Royal, which it failed to attack, leaving the Micmac residents of the area, who had provided much-needed support to the French while they were based in the Bedford Basin, riven by the diseases, primarily typhus and typhoid fever, that had struck down many French sailors. End quote. Whoever wrote this entry when they called it shambolic, like it was a shambles,
I know.
I was like, whoever wrote this is cool.
Yeah, it's really cool.
The town of Halifax was established by the command of British Governor Edward Cornwallis in 1749. And for the next 200 years, it saw involvement in Father Le Loutre's War, the Dartmouth Massacre, and French and Indian War, Napoleonic Wars, Crimean War, the American Revolution, the War of 1812, the American Civil War, and World War II.
It didn't spare anything.
It saw it all. All throughout the Revolutionary War, Halifax was a major staging area for attacks on the 13 U.S. colonies. In 1776, British General William Howe arrived in Halifax after being driven out of Boston. With him were 200 officers, 3,000 men, and over 4,000 Loyalist refugees who all settled in the city and surrounding area. In fact, there were so many Loyalist refugees escaping the brand new USA that Nova Scotia was subdivided into 2 new colonies, New Brunswick and Cape Breton Island. Before, during, and after the Civil War, Halifax welcomed thousands of escaped and former slaves as well. With the influx of so many people, Halifax established several schools, including the first school for the deaf in all of Atlantic Canada, the Halifax School for the Deaf, in 1856, and the first residential school for the blind in all of Canada opened in Halifax in 1871. And that's where my story really kind of starts, with a school. According to 5fishermen.com, by the early 1800s, the parishioners of St. Paul's Anglican Church decided that the children of Halifax, regardless of their financial status, deserved an education. So in 1818, they opened the first free school in all of Canada, where both boys and girls could receive a free education. But soon, the 4-story clapboard and stone building on the corner of Argyle Street was way too small to accommodate all of its students, so it relocated to a bigger building. The building on Argyle Street was purchased by a former governess named Anna. Anna turned it into the Halifax Victorian School of Art, and later in life, she wrote a little book about her time as governess for the children of the King of Siam. Her book was turned into the musical, The King and I.
Really?
Yep.
That's cool.
That is cool. When the art school outgrew its capacity and moved on, the Argyle Street building was bought by the Snow family sometime between 1900 and 1903. The John Snow and Company Funeral Home remained in the building for the next 70 years and took care of the funeral needs of the city. And on 2 occasions, those needs were dire. If you're a Titanic buff, then you kind of know where this is going. On April 15, 1912, when the Titanic hit the iceberg 640 kilometers off the coast of Newfoundland, 1,517 lives were lost. This included 700 crew members. Of the 710 third-class passengers, only 174 survived. The nearest mainland port was Halifax. According to globalnews.ca, John Snow boarded the cable repair ship, the Mackay Bennett, taking with him 125 coffins and bombing fluid and iron in order to weigh down the bodies buried at sea. Only the wealthier victims were brought back to the Snow Funeral Home on Argyle Street. The John Snow and Company Funeral Home prepared funeral services for 188 of the Titanic victims, 129 who were either not identified or their families could not afford to have their bodies transported home. They were buried in the Fairview Lawn Cemetery. Of those who were identified were John Jacob Astor IV, the wealthiest man aboard the ship, and Charles M. Hayes, the president of the Grand Trunk Railway. And then 5 years later on December 6, 1917, a major disaster struck Halifax directly. It was during World War I, and Halifax was a major port for war supplies, troops, and munitions. The harbor was inundated with ships, either arriving or departing, and on that morning, 2 ships collided. The Norwegian merchant steamship Emo had been converted into a war relief ship. She was empty of cargo as she attempted to leave Halifax harbor. The French munitions ship, the Mont Blanc, was filled with 2,300 tons of picric acid, 200 tons of TNT, 10 tons of gun cotton, and 35 tons of benzol. These are the 2 ships that hit each other. The Mont Blanc caught on fire, which was a huge spectacle for the hundreds of people who flocked to the shore to watch between 8:45 and 9:30 a.m. When the Mont Blanc exploded, it released the equivalent of 2.9 kilotons of TNT. The blast sent a plume of smoke 11,800 feet into the air, and it was felt 100 miles away. Nearly every structure within a half-mile radius was obliterated. The pressure wave snapped trees, bent iron rails, and momentarily brought the water level surrounding the ship to the seabed, causing a 60-foot-high tsunami. 1,600 people lost their lives immediately, including an entire Micmac community. 9,000 more were injured when shards of window glass flew into their faces, blinding them. Overturned stoves and lamps set fires, taking out entire city blocks, and even more people found themselves buried under the rubble of 12,000 buildings. It was horrific.
Yeah, not a good time to be a looky-loo down on the beach checking this out.
Or
they got the brunt of it.
Well, yeah, but I mean, there was one whole section of Halifax that was just flattened.
Well, they felt it 100 miles away.
Mm-hmm.
That's just, it's hard to imagine.
Yeah, well, it's like an atomic bomb going off in your harbor.
Exactly.
Basically. The Snow Funeral Parlor's windows were shattered in the blast, but the company stayed open because they had no choice. There's a photograph of the building taken a few days after the disaster, with wooden coffins stacked 3 high around the entire perimeter of the building. They conducted 30 to 40 funeral services per day.
Yeah, and I would highly recommend that you go check out this picture. It'll be on our Facebook page.
Yes.
But it's just mind-boggling.
Yeah, because there's people standing right next to the stacks of coffins, and they're stacked higher than the grown adults standing there. In 1974, the former funeral home became the Five Fishermen Restaurant. And I tried to find the origin of the restaurant's name, like if it was a specific 5 fishermen that it was named after, or if the men that started it were, or women. I don't know. I couldn't find why it was called that.
Yeah, I know what you mean. You would think that it would be named after probably 5 people that started it, or 5 good friends or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know where the name came from. But the ghost stories began soon after the restaurant opened. And the restaurant itself isn't shy about sharing their experiences. According to their website, it's pretty common for staff to see glasses fly off of the shelves, or to see cutlery on the table shift by themselves and then fall onto the floor. It's also common to see the faucets in the many sinks turn on and off by themselves. Apparently, one of the servers was there pretty late one night, and he was the only one in the dining room. As he went to flip off the lights near the bar area, he heard the sound of someone behind him walking through the swinging doors that led into the kitchen. When he whipped around to look, the door was still swinging back and forth, but the kitchen was empty. Another server was running the credit card machine at the end of the night, and he was anxious to be done so that he could leave. So he was kind of annoyed when somebody came up and tapped him on the shoulder. When he turned around, not only was there nobody there, but he also reminded himself that he was alone in the building. The salad bar area seems to be very active, especially before the restaurant opens or at night after it's closed. Again, according to the Five Fishermen's official website, staff have experienced all kinds of things there. For example, after closing one night, a waiter was passing by the captain's quarters, which is the name of one of the private event rooms that they have. And he could hear a man and a woman loudly arguing inside the room. So, confused, he opened the only door. The voices stopped, and the room was empty. Another time, a waitress noticed somebody walk into the captain's quarters after the restaurant was closed. Concerned that there was still a customer in the building, she went in to tell them that they needed to leave, but she too found nothing but an empty room.
It's definitely a hot spot.
Yes. And 3 p.m. seems to be a significant time for at least one of the ghosts that haunts the restaurant to show themselves, because a lot of activity happens at 3 p.m.
It's the witching hour.
Now that's 3 a.m.
Oh, that's right. You said 3 p.m.
3 p.m. in the afternoon.
Well, that's unusual.
I know, in broad daylight. So one summer day, one of the staff was setting up the salad bar for dinner service, which meant that he had to carry large trays filled with items down a flight of stairs, through the swinging doors, and around the bar to the salad bar. As he was walking through, he heard this very loud crash, but because his hands were full, he had to put the tray down before he could go investigate. At the bar, he found a shattered glass ashtray on the floor, even though he hadn't been anywhere near that area as he passed through, so he couldn't have knocked it himself because he wasn't in that area. He bent over to pick up the pieces, and when he stood up, he happened to be facing a mirror. He wasn't alone in the reflection, because behind him, walking away, was an elderly man with long gray hair wearing a long black coat. The young man quickly turned around, but there wasn't anybody there behind him. A few years later, the assistant manager had his own encounter with the man in the black coat, and again, it was 3 p.m. The assistant manager was on the phone across from the salad bar when he caught a glimpse of a gray-haired man in a black coat standing at the bottom of the landing. He called out that he'd be right with him in a minute, and he finished his phone conversation. But once he hung up, he couldn't find the old man anywhere, and the front door, the only way into the restaurant, was still locked. Although the man in the black coat generally doesn't interact with the staff, there was one time when he did, or at least something did. A hostess was showing a couple to their table one night during a busy dinner service. As she stopped at the salad bar to explain some things, she suddenly felt something graze the side of her face. She couldn't figure out what had touched her, but she just kind of shrugged it off. Afterwards, a coworker asked her what had happened to her because she had a red mark across her cheek as though someone had actually slapped her, which was even more confusing to her because the touch that she'd experienced at the salad bar was nowhere near that violent. It just felt like light fingertips or something grazing her face. So perhaps the gentleman in the black coat is a member of the Snow family, or perhaps he was a victim of either the Titanic or the Mont Blanc explosion disasters.
Well, it could be anything because there was so much death there.
Yeah.
So who knows? He definitely sounds, well, he's described as you would think that he'd be rather creepy. But I guess that's probably just,
Well, the long gray hair is what kind of throws me, because if they ran a funeral home, they most likely didn't have long hair. So probably not a member of that family.
Right.
In a long black coat. So if we put him in a time period.
He could have been one of the residents.
Yes.
That's the vibe I'm getting. And for some reason, something keeps making me think that there's something to do with this salad bar.
Yes.
You know?
There's a lot going on at the salad bar.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there also happens to be a gray mist that sometimes appears, and it doesn't quite manifest into a solid figure. And the Five Fishermen website shares 2 encounters with this mist. At closing time one night, a server was resetting her station for the following day when she heard a tapping noise coming from behind her. At first, she couldn't figure out where it was coming from, but eventually she realized it was coming from the window across the room, as if a tree branch was hitting it. Except they were on the 2nd floor, and there aren't any trees outside the windows. But as she walked closer, she could see some sort of gray, mist-like shadow hovering on the other side of the glass, and she watched it until it disappeared. Another server saw the same shadowy gray mist moving down the staircase.
That's enough to give you goosebumps.
Yeah. So they don't know if it's the man in the black coat when he's not manifesting or if it's a completely different spirit. These days, according to CTV News CA, the restaurant tries to have at least 2 servers on duty at closing time because of all the bizarre things that happen. They commonly see flickering lights and hear disembodied footsteps. They've also heard a woman crying, and they've seen a little girl who appears to be lost. And the man in the black coat, of course, who scared a dishwasher one night. As the newly hired dishwasher was scrubbing pans in the sink, he saw the man in the black coat float past him.
Jeez.
I know. According to the Global News article, back in 2017, manager Wallace Frazier was well aware of his staff's experiences, and then he had his own. He was alone in the building, and he was working in the upstairs office around 2 a.m. when he heard somebody knocking. The sound seemed to travel all around the room. And then, of course, is the ghost in the bathroom, which Wes covered last week in his haunted bathroom story, but you'll have to listen to that episode to hear that story. I'm not going to retell it. So, if you want delicious food in a building that has quite the history, in a city with quite the history, get yourself to the Five Fishermen restaurant in Halifax, Nova Scotia.
Yeah, perhaps you too will see the man in the black coat.
Hopefully not in the bathroom.
Yeah, hopefully not.
Yeah, it's quite the haunted place. But with a city like that, I mean, my gosh.
Yeah, you kind of would expect it to be.
Yeah.
That's where your mind goes to. Oh, it's got to be haunted.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, it's truly an incredible story.
I know. And it all started with a bathroom story. And one little sentence you said about the Titanic and the Halifax disaster. And I was like, oh, there's got to be more there.
Yeah, gonna go down the rabbit hole.
Yep.
That's what happens. All right, everyone. We'll be back right after this quick break.
Hey, did you know? Dolphins have been known to save humans during shark attacks. In 2002, 36-year-old Australian Grant Dixon was fishing from a boat off northern Queensland when the boat sank. Injured and alone in the water, Dixon soon noticed a group of sharks circling him. But soon after, a pod of dolphins arrived, putting themselves between the bleeding man and the sharks until the sharks gave up and swam off. In 2004, a group of lifeguards in New Zealand were saved from a great white shark when a pod of dolphins arrived and circled around the lifeguards, waving their tails and slapping the water until the shark turned tail and left. And then in 2007, the same thing happened to 24-year-old pro surfer Todd Endress. This time, the dolphins scared off a great white that was over 16 feet long, and they stayed with Endress until he swam all the way to shore. And lastly, Martin Richardson was swimming in the Red Sea when a mako shark attacked and bit him 5 times. As he waited to die, a pod of dolphins appeared, scared off the shark, and stayed with Richardson until a rescue boat arrived. Who'da thunk it?
All right, we're back, and I'm going to tell all you fellow wanderers about the Devil's Bible tonight. Herman the Recluse must have done something really bad in the 13th century, because the Benedictine monk was sentenced to death by being bricked up in a wall. To avoid this awful end, he made a deal with his superior. He'd put together a 320-page book in one night, all copied by hand to show his devotion to God and his repentance for whatever he'd done. Then the devil got involved. It's a whole big deal with the devil thing that produced a very, very big book that has stumped scholars for decades. Bound books have been around since the 1st century AD, when the ancient Romans decided that scrolls weren't all that practical anymore. By the 4th century, the idea of binding pages into books really caught on, and by the 15th century and the invention of the printing press, there were over 9 million books to choose from, which is ironic considering only 5 to 10% of the population could read at that time. Obviously, most of the earlier books were either religious or medical in nature. Sometimes modern-day people came across a medieval-era book that is so unusual that it's downright mysterious, and its one outstanding feature becomes what it's known for. Other times, it's the book's sheer size that astounds experts, or the long and wild ride it took to get from point A to point B. Tonight, I'm going to tell you all about the book that checks off all 3 boxes. Plus, there's that deal with the devil thing I mentioned earlier. The Codex Gigas was never officially found because it was never actually lost. But how it was made, who exactly made it, and why it has a 19-inch tall depiction of the devil is a mystery. Historians know that it was created sometime during the 13th century for a Bohemian monastery. But in 1295, the Podlazice monks pawned it to the Sedlitz monastery for money. By 1594, Rudolph II, the Holy Roman Emperor, King of Hungary and Croatia, King of Bohemia, and Archduke of Austria, borrowed it to add it to his own collection of books in Prague. When the Swedish army invaded during the 30 Years' War in 1648, they took the codex as war booty, and then it ended up in the Swedish Royal Library. Well, except for the time it was thrown out the window. On May 7, 1697, a fire broke out, destroying most of the Royal Library, but a quick-thinking vicar picked up the 165-pound book and threw it out the window in order to save it. He accidentally hit a bystander with it, injuring them, but he saved the book. But it's been in the Royal Library, or the National Library of Sweden, ever since. One of the things that makes the Codex Gigas so special is that it's the largest medieval manuscript that still exists. In fact, the name Codex Gigas is Latin for giant book. It's 36 inches tall, 20 inches wide, and almost 9 inches thick. Its cover is made of leather-covered wooden boards with metal fittings, and its pages, all 310 of them, would have taken 160 donkey skins to create. And, as I had mentioned before, it weighs a whopping 165 pounds. As for what's written inside it, well, that's where even more mystery can be found. First, it contains the entire Christian Bible and 2 works by Flavius Josephus, The Jewish War and Jewish Antiquities. It also contains an encyclopedia by Saint Isidore of Seville and the Chronicle of Bohemia, written by a Bohemian monk named Cosmos. In addition, there are a few shorter pieces, like one about medical practices at that time. There are also a few illuminations or drawings. Most of them are done in red, blue, yellow, green, and gold ink. On one page, there are 20 initials in blue letters surrounded by red vines. But it's the full-page, 19-inch drawing of the devil that captures most people's attention, which is why you might know the Codex Gigas by its nickname, the Devil's Bible. It's pretty uncommon for a medieval manuscript, especially one that contains the Christian Bible, to have such a huge depiction of the devil, especially all alone on the page with nothing written around it. And this devil is unlike any other. The devil's face is bright green, with tight brown curls hugging the top of its oversized head. His ears, which are red-tipped, are rather large, and his horns, which are also red-tipped, curve inwards and almost meet over the top of his head. His eyes are wide open and have red pupils. His mouth is open, revealing sharp white teeth and 2 long forked tongues. Although his face is bright green, the rest of his body is tan-colored. He's in a crouched position, but his arms are outstretched over his head. He has just 4 fingers on each hand and 4 toes on each foot, which all end in curved red claws. But he doesn't have a tail. He's completely naked except for a small loincloth, which appears to be made out of ermine. According to BookRiot.com, ermine was a sign of royalty, indicating that the devil is the prince of darkness. Depicting the devil as green wasn't all that uncommon. Green represented the wilderness of nature and the color of envy, so it was used once in a while as a skin color for Satan, although black and then red were far more common. But the red-tipped horns, ears, and claws were a little bit much, even back then. Scholars have wondered for years why the scribe who created the Devil's Bible included such a graphic and large depiction. Maybe it has something to do with the legend of Herman the Recluse. Back in the 13th century, Herman the Recluse was living in a Bohemian monastery, which would be in the modern Czech Republic. Herman apparently did something very, very bad, although we don't know what that was. Benedictine monks were required to follow very strict rules, written down and divided into 73 chapters by Saint Benedict in the year 530. These rules covered everything from praying 8 times a day to how much of their remaining time should be spent performing manual labor. Each chapter was incredibly specific, from how they should stay silent as much as possible to how they could climb the 12 steps towards heaven. The steps were figurative, of course, and included things like being obedient, being patient, not laughing, and having a fear of God. Chapters 23 to 29 cover punishments, from small infractions to the gravest of disobedience. Now, I took a minute and read through the punishments. They ranged anywhere from being talked to in private by your superiors to being banished from the communal dining area. The really bad stuff got you excommunicated. So, as I had said before, Herman the Recluse must have done something really, really bad, because his punishment was death by being walled up alive. That type of punishment doesn't even exist in the rules of St. Benedict, as far as I could see. But anyway, that was Herman's fate. According to ancientorigins.com, Herman wasn't too keen on being bricked up behind a wall, and so he made an offer. He'd create a book that included all the world's knowledge, including the Bible, of course, and he'd do it in just one night. His offer was accepted, probably because his superiors knew that Herman would never finish it. But Herman got right to work and wrote and wrote and wrote. But as the hours wore on and the impossible task seemed to stretch on endlessly before him, Herman asked for help, but not from God. He appealed to the devil. The devil answered, and in return for Herman's soul, he gave him the energy and strength to complete all 320 pages by morning, including the scary and bloodthirsty depiction of Satan. The book was so massive that it took 2 men just to lift it. Now, I'm assuming Herman the Recluse was allowed to live out the rest of his life until the devil came for his soul. It's quite the legend, right? But here's where things get really weird. First, scholars don't know if Herman the Recluse even wrote the Devil's Bible. People have just used his name because it's the only name written in the book, and so people assume that he must have been the scribe. But second, several handwriting analysis experts have determined that the entire book was written by just one scribe. They estimate that he would have had to write continuously, day and night, for 5 years just to complete the writing alone. Adding in illustrations and the fact that he would have had to still eat, pray 8 times a day, and sleep, the project would have taken 25 to 30 years to complete. And here's the craziest part. How did one scribe work on the book for that long, and his handwriting remained exactly the same? Think about that. Say Herman, or whoever the scribe was, began writing at the age of 20. It's remarkable and kind of impossible that his handwriting was unaffected by illness, arthritis, or just plain age by the time he was 45 or 50.
You know what? Just the other day I said to you that I was handwriting something, and I can't write like I used to. Like, my handwriting's totally different than it used to be even 2 years ago or 3 years ago.
Right.
So, yeah, how could they write a 320-page book and their handwriting never changes?
Yeah, that's just mind-boggling, because we all know that our handwriting changes over time.
Unless he did it all in one night.
Well, it kind of appears that way, but we all know that's impossible, right?
It should be.
And yet, the Devil's Bible appears to have been written by one man who was completely unaffected by age or time.
It's weird.
Yeah, I know. Like I said before, it's totally weird. It really gets you thinking. And it's also kind of interesting what Herman decided to include in his 320-page book. First, there's the Old Testament, and then the two pieces by Flavius Josephus. Then the Encyclopedia. The transcribed medical texts are from Hippocrates. And then there's the History of Bohemia. Remember, Herman the Recluse claimed he was putting the world's knowledge all in one book. But there's also pages about magical formulas, including how to cure a fever and how to catch a thief. Now, at first, I thought that was a little strange, since I thought magic would have been seen as demonic by the church. But it turns out medieval and Benedictine monks would have used some practices that modern-day church would consider magical, if they were designed to help people. They just stayed away from the ones that might summon demons. Interestingly, the page after the drawing of the devil includes how to perform an exorcism. And then there's medieval graffiti, places where other monks over the years added their names to specific pages, kind of like when people have carved their initials into a rock or a tree. The illustration of the devil is on the right-hand side of the book. Across from it, on the left side, is a full-page illustration of the heavenly city. These are the only full-page illustrations in the entire book. Scholars have suggested that Herman the Recluse was trying to show the two possible outcomes of living either a good life or a bad one. But since they are so huge on the page, they must have really mattered to him, which some people see as further proof of the legend. Heaven and hell must have been really on his mind if he completed the book all in one night at the price of his soul. Now, throughout my story, I've mentioned several times that the Codex Gigas was 320 pages long, but today it's only 310. And that's because at some point in time, someone ripped out the last 10 pages. And that might be the biggest mystery of all. What did they say? What did they contain?
You know, that drives me nuts.
I know, me too, because it's just mind-bending that someone would rip out the last 10 pages. And you know that it was done deliberately.
Well, yeah. And what if it was like a little biography of the monks that had worked on it over 25 years? Or what if it was the biography of the one monk that wrote it in one night?
Yeah, we'll never know. I mean, it could have been a monk that ripped these pages out. Or, who knows, someone that didn't want us to know what those last 10 pages included.
Right. And where are they? Did they get burned in a fireplace, or are they tucked away somewhere?
In some old desk. Perhaps someday they'll come up on eBay for sale. Somebody found it in their attic.
Oh, the missing pages?
The missing pages.
Yeah.
But that book is incredible. It really gives you something to think about.
Yeah, and I'd never heard of it before.
Just the handwriting. That baffles me the most. How did the handwriting not change throughout the time? It would have.
Yeah.
There's no way it wouldn't have.
Even if you've been writing for multiple hours at a time, towards the end of that time, your handwriting's going to change because you've gotten tired just sitting there writing.
It's as though the devil wrote it himself.
What a weird thing. Huh. I'm glad it's in a museum, though.
Me too.
Where people can see it.
Yeah.
Well, everybody, if you would like to know more about the Five Fishermen restaurant in Halifax or the Codex Gigas, you can always check our sources in our show notes.
That you can. Well, all you fellow wanderers, thank you again for joining us. Join us again next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you soon. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to traveling with you again to the places where our minds wander.
If you like what you heard, please take a moment and provide us with a 5-star rating and a comment on your favorite listening platform. It really helps us move up the list and become more visible on the podcast charts so new people can find us.
And thank you all for your continued support.
See you next week for an all-new episode.